No one called to ask for assistance to make it to the meeting today. We're going to begin working House Bill 2279. And Chris, could you give us an overview?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2279 would add 2 new sections to the Kansas Groundwater Management Act. Section 1 would require certain annual reports from each GMD to be submitted to the legislature not later than January 31st of each year. The annual report should include detailed financial statements and activities undertaken by the boards and prepared currently in the bill according to generally accepted accounting principles. Additionally, the annual report must include an itemized list of all income and sources of income received by a GMD board, an itemized list of expenditures, and an accounting of all assets currently held by the board. Section 2 would require GMDs to submit action plans for conservation and incorporate those into the GMD's management program. The GMD would be required to identify certain areas of concern and then take actions not later than July 1 of 2024. They have to identify those concerns and then submit the action plan to the chief engineer by July 1 of 2026. And they must review the action plans every 5 years. And if they don't, or if they fail to submit a plan that sufficiently or adequately addresses the identified areas of concern, the chief engineer may take corrective actions under the authority granted under the Kansas Water Appropriations Act or Kansas Groundwater Management Act. They are also required to submit annual reports on those action plans to the legislature. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I'll direct the committee's attention to the fiscal note. When it was originally proposed, the Geological Survey Group estimated $627,900. Since that time, they have come back with an email to me and revised that number for their phase 1 approach. In fiscal year 2024, that number should be $120,000. So it's $120,000. His prior estimation was for far more full-time equivalent employees that they don't really believe they need for this particular program. So it's basically the fiscal note has been reduced to $120,000. For your information. Are there any amendments or discussion on this bill? Representative Vaughn?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment. And I believe Chris made paper copies for everybody, so we'll get those passed out.
Yes, it went down to
1.5? Oh, yeah. 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 Okay, so as I kind of mentioned to folks earlier, this was the compromise amendment that we worked with stakeholders on to incorporate all the feedback that we got when we did the hearing of this bill. And I want to make sure we all feel comfortable with what's included, so I'll kind of walk through the major elements of it, and then I'm open to questions as well. In the financial reporting section, we got the request to do the gap waiver so that the GMDs aren't required to spend the additional funds to do the generally accepted accounting principles audit. So we removed that and did it in accordance with that waiver, but then we're just still asking that they submit that additional information and that be reported to the legislature on January 31st of each year. There was discussion, does it make sense to move that date back because audits are usually available at a later date? Kind of the discussion was, while that would be ideal, the idea is to increase accountability and transparency around finances, which would mean having us be in session while these budgets are submitted. So the January 31st date was kept, and that language remained. So those were kind of the major changes. The only other addition was to the report, we added the reduced consumptive use. So for their statement on what the detailing of how their funds were spent, it's just kind of outlining, if our goal is to ultimately reduce the use of groundwater to extend the life of the aquifer and conserve that resource, that's kind of a key element of it. So that just is something that was added to be a little bit more explicit in that report detailing how those funds were spent to work towards those goals. And that's everything in the financial reporting section. And then for the action plan section, there were comments that some of the language was repetitive of what's in the actual GMD Act. So those initial sections that you see striked were striked because of that. So not a real substantive change, but just to make it fit better within the GMD Act. And then the other kind of broad recommendation that we got was to make it more specific. So that's where you'll see the addition of the word priority. So instead of just areas of concern, they're now the priority areas of concern. And then that criteria has been limited or has been made to be more precise. So those areas include areas where the estimated usable lifetime of groundwater is 50 years or less, or an unreasonable deterioration of the quality of groundwater is occurring. And then those areas may also include the other areas that are listed. So it kind of really narrows it in on the most urgent issues, and that allows GMDs to include those other areas of concern if that is appropriate to their districts. And then some of these changes were also made in order to streamline the process for implementation into the management program. There is a management program statute. So the goal was just to make sure we were clear about the difference between the action plan and the management program and then how those work together. So the action plan is separate, and basically they use the priority areas of concern to develop that action plan, and the action plan is updated every 5 years or reviewed every 5 years and updated as may be necessary. And then, let's see. And as a side note, for those who were kind of tuned into the LPA conversation yesterday, that's in line with what some of the recommendations were coming out of that audit, was to have a more consistent timeline associated with how their areas of concern and then their goals are being identified and implemented. So the 5 years kind of creates a reasonable timeline to do that on a consistent basis. And then the last the last kind of big change was in the actual follow-up of review of those action plans. So chief engineer reviews the action plans, that's the same. And then in the section with the last balloon on the bottom of page 2, originally it had that if a board failed to identify action plans or priority areas, or if it failed to produce adequate action plans, then the chief engineer could take corrective actions under the authority granted to him in statute. This kind of specified it changed adequate to reasonable, as was recommended by committee, by Comfrey feedback. And then it kind of outlined that instead of just direct action, the chief engineer will help the district create action plans. So the chief engineer creates action plans and then implements those action plans in order to meet the requirements of this statute or this section. And then on the last page, the two main additions, we also got the feedback that the folks who are currently in a local enhanced management area have done a lot of this work already, and that it would make sense in the first round of approvals for that to be taken into consideration. So those are considered to be in compliance with the requirements of this section through the first phase of the action plans. And then the very last change, we also got feedback that, different departments may need some additional funds to fully implement this. We have the updated fiscal note, but it's just the addition of if there are additional requirements that may be needed in order to execute this, the Kansas Water Authority could consider the efforts of all agencies involved to assist the districts when recommending appropriations of the State Water Plan Fund. So that's not a requirement, but just something for KWA to consider as these action plans are implemented and carried out. So I think those are all the major changes, and I would be happy to stand for questions.
First, I need to ask if there's a second to the motion to amend, Representative Stockstill? Okay. And then to address the amendment, Representative Fairchild, did you want to address the amendment or the main bill? Okay, then.
Howerton.
I'm sorry, I can't read your writing. Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification for the reviser, maybe on page 2, on the balloon out to of line 18, reasonably, where does that go?
I apologize, I did not connect it. Reasonably would go any place where it referred to an adequate plan. I think it's.
Okay.
I can also answer that, Chris. I think, so it should be in that section 2A, the board of each district shall conduct public education outreach in each priority area so that the board may develop an action plan to reasonably address the identified areas in each area
Okay.
based on input, et cetera.
Thank you. And I support this amendment. I think it's great. This kind of takes everybody's input and includes that. So thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to make sure I've got the full grasp and looking at this, there's a lot of red on here, but in essence, we're not really changing any of the intent. Everything pretty much in here is just a clarification, either based on conferees or things we've seen on the committee in reviewing this. Is that accurate?
Yes, thank you, Representative. I tend to get a little bit in the weeds, but yes, that is the intent. Ultimately, we're hoping that we're empowering groundwater management districts to identify the most important areas that need to be addressed in relation to conserving and extending the life of the Ogallala Aquifer, and then coming up with plans to do that.
I think that's good. I don't have any objections to this amendment. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, would you like to move your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move my amendment.
All those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All opposed, say aye. Motion carries. Okay, we're back on discussion of the main bill. Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tried to, approach this bill from a completely neutral perspective, and I appreciate all the hard work that was done on it. But basically, I just decided that I would contact, some of the people that in my district who serve on the GMD board or who are associated with it, and some of them have some concerns about the bill, the reporting requirements, that it could cause more paperwork and more costs for them. And so I think based on some of the concerns that have been presented to me, I think I'll be voting against the bill, but I just wanted to explain my position and my vote, and I certainly respect all the hard work that's been done on the bill.
Thank you. Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having worked with the Division of Water Resources and spent an extensive amount of time interacting with all the groundwater management districts, I think this bill strikes a good balance between moving the state as a whole forward, protecting natural resources, but leaving the crux of this in local control. The local boards have a lot of opportunity to go out and make the changes that folks would like to see based on local input. And I think we as a committee and this bill does a good job striking that balance, so I'll be supporting it.
Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, we'll take a vote, or we'll move the bill. Go ahead, move it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we move out, I can't remember the terminology, I'm sorry, House Bill 2279 favorably for passage. As amended. Thank you. Thank you.
We
Wow.
we
Team
got-
effort.
We are a team here. And we have the second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. One. Okay. Okay, we'll close the hearing on 2279. Yes? Does anyone wish to be recorded on their vote? Okay. We'll take that as an affirmative. All right, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2279, and we'll move on to House Bill 2302. Chris, would you give us a brief overview?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2302 would distribute 1.231% of sales tax revenue generated, figure that equals about 54.1 million in fiscal year 24. And along with that, the transfers, the $8 million in statutory transfers from KSA 79, 4804, and 82A 953A will not be made until July 1, 2028 to the State Water Plan Fund, as long as that full amount of sales tax revenue is transferred to the State Water Plan Fund, according to the bill. The bill would also create 2 new funds in the Water Technical Assistance Fund and the Water Projects Grant Fund. So every July 1, from 2023 to 2028, $5 million will be transferred from the State Water Plan Fund to the Water Technical Assistance Fund, and $15 million will be transferred from the State Water Fund to the Water Projects Grant Fund. Additionally, fiscal years 24, 25, and 26, $15 million from the State Water Plan Fund shall be used to retire debt associated with Milford and Perry Lake reservoirs. The bill to include certain recommendations that can be made by the Kansas Water Authority for salaries or supplementing salaries to implement the state water plan, including certain positions that could be used by 2 conservation districts that present a joint proposal to the KWA. And all of Section 1, including the 2 new funds and transfers, will sunset on July 1, 2028, and any remaining money and liabilities in the funds will be transferred back to the State Water Plan Fund. Going on to the funds, the Water Technical Assistance Fund can be used to provide grants to municipalities for the planning, engineering, managing, and other technical assistance that may be necessary in the development of plans for water infrastructure projects. Funds administered by the Kansas Water Office, and they're authorized to adopt rules and regulations to establish criteria for the grants from that fund. No single grant from the fund can exceed $1 million unless specified by an appropriation act of the legislature. And finally, if the fund balance ever exceeds 15 million, then the excess money can be used for other state water plan fund purposes. Section 3 would establish the Water Projects Grant Fund. This fund can be used to provide full or partial funding in the form of grants to any municipality or special district for the construction, repair, maintenance, or replacement of water-related infrastructures and related construction costs. It could be used for matching monies for grant or loan applications for water infrastructure projects, and grants may be applied to outstanding loan balances from the Public Water Supply Loan Fund or the Kansas Pollution Control Revolving Fund. Once again, the Kansas Water Office administers the fund and can adopt rules and regulations to establish criteria for grants. No single grant can exceed $8 million unless specified by an appropriation act of the legislature. And if the fund balance ever exceeds $45 million, then the excess money can be used for state water plan fund purposes. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, are there any amendments or discussion as it relates to House Bill 2302? Representative Blex?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. I do have an amendment. The reviser could pass that out. And I will go ahead a little bit and start on it. And basically, this would be on page 2, and right after line 25 would be a new item number 3. And the statement on that the Kansas Water Authority shall encourage funding requests from state and local entities that cooperate with qualified nonprofit entities on projects that provide a direct benefit to water quantity and quality, including water infrastructure that are both natural and man-made, and include matching funds from non-state sources. And really the intent of this is to utilize some of the nature-based solutions are sometimes the best and certainly the most cost-effective. And a good example of that would be playa restorations out in the west. So, and there's also and my intent originally was to have a lot of leverage with NGOs that have the technical expertise. A lot of them have engineers on staff and can put these projects on the ground really, really quick. And the good thing is the cooperation and partnership will allow a lot of leverage of money. And so I would encourage you to support that, and I'll stand for any questions.
Is there a second to this amendment? Okay. Representative Titus? Okay. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say I think this is a great amendment. I think a lot of these groups do really great work in our state, and it's excellent to include them and make sure that they are included in this process as well. So I just wanted to say I support the amendment.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I close on my amendment.
We'll take a vote. All those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any other amendments or discussion on the bill as amended? Representative Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment. So this amendment is just sort of some general cleanup and clarification based on feedback from the conferees. The changes begin on page 3, and the first thing I would explain is really some clarification of how we describe the entities. So there was a little difficulty in drafting because some entities that are considered municipalities by the legal definition, such as a groundwater management district, because they have a board and they have taxing authority, it wasn't clear how they fit in when we're thinking about cities and towns. So I've tried to streamline that so we have municipalities, meaning cities and counties, and then everything else is sort of a special district. And so you'll see changes to clarify that. The one point is the paragraph 2 there on page 14, or on line 14, page 3, where we explicitly say these things that might legally be municipalities shouldn't be considered small municipalities because they have some tax-paying constituents, but they're not voters. So I just tried to clarify the intent there. The other changes are on the back page. On page 4, section C, line 11, it wasn't clearly included. The rule and reg authority and what it would cover wasn't clear, so I've clarified that for the water office. And then the biggest text would be a new subsection E at line 34, just to clarify that the water office and the Department of Health and Environment will have to coordinate when they evaluate applicants for the state revolving loan fund monies and how these grants may work into those applications and forgiveness. And I wanted to make sure they had statutory authority to share information and work together. So I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Is there a second for this amendment? Representative Blex? Is there any discussion on this amendment? Representative Amix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, if I could, or clarification, any change to the fiscal note because of the amendments?
This should not change the fiscal note.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, would you like to close?
I move my amendment.
All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any other amendments or discussion on the amended bill? What is the wishes of the committee? Representative Titus?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that the committee, I would move that the committee pass out House Bill 2302 as amended favorably.
And a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, committee. Representative Blacks.
Chair, I'd like a point of privilege. You know, House Bill 2302 is an unprecedented and historic commitment to our economic resources, to our most precious and concerning resource, which would be a sustainable water supply. And I'd like to acknowledge the pioneer and visionary work of those people that may have a few gray hairs like myself that developed the Blue Ribbon Task Force and all that work that went into it, that really set the base for what we're doing here today, 2302, the kind of the foundation, and I appreciate it. And I'm really proud to be a small part of this committee's historic legislation. And I'd certainly like to thank the leadership and members of this committee and certainly the wisdom and advice of those dedicated agency staff that's kind of guided us through these challenges to ensure that Kansans have a long-term water and sustainable supply. And you know, personally, this is a real milestone for me. I feel real blessed to have grown up in eastern Kansas, of tromping in the prairies and the forest and the creek banks, and that kind of, and our eastern Kansas farm, and that kind of set the stage for a lifelong career in an area of conservation. And I guess those experiences give me that fledgling passion way back when and appreciation for conservation. And I'm sure many of the people sitting out there in the audience and in this committee can probably relate a similar experience. But I am really proud to be a part of the milestone that this committee's done here, and certainly appreciate Chairman Minnick's leadership in guiding this. I mean, my gosh, look how small this, what we accomplished in about 2 or 3 pages. A lot of that other stuff don't even pertain to water, but, you know, compared to time. So congratulations. My soapbox, but this is a legacy for all of us, and thank you to everybody.
Any other comments? Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did not write it down. I just want to say that I echo your thoughts as well. This is historic. We have worked really hard, and everybody out there, the conversations that we've had in between sessions has just been phenomenal. The input from everybody has been phenomenal. I am honored to be on this committee. I will publicly state that when I was first put on the Water Committee last year, I was completely bummed, going, water, But I quickly learned how important water is to the state, not only just to agriculture, but to industry, to municipalities, to life, right? Water is life. And that's what we want in Kansas, is life. And I pulled some numbers, or had research pull some numbers. We have shorted the water funding $84.5 million over the past, since 1991. And I hope this makes a big step in making up for that and restoring maybe some things that we should have done anyway. And we're not done yet. I'll just say that. We will not stop talking water even after this, so.
Any further comments? I want to go ahead, Representative Smith.
Well, I don't want to upstage you here, so, but the idea, I think, this is my first year on water. Water used to be a part of agriculture when I was in the ag. I knew I needed to get back to this and get involved in this. I'm incredibly impressed by the public and the stakeholders' involvement and staying involved and being a part of this process. And we'd be remiss if we didn't also mention the staff that has been working diligently to pay attention to the little things that we think we need in this bill, you know, and getting them right over and over. It takes a lot of work to put this together in a way that it's intended to be, you know, a lot of detail, so.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the agencies that have worked with us. We've taken a Kansas approach to the issue of water. We've worked together as a team. Staff has done an awesome job. I appreciate everybody on the committee. I really appreciate all our conferees that have come in and given us testimony. You can tell from our amendments here that we've taken that seriously, and we've included a lot of their testimony, and we think we have a very good start on this issue. We've got a long ways to go, but this is a really good beginning. And I want to thank the committee for your hard work. I appreciate it. If there's no further comments, we are adjourned.